Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be my wrap-up for the first half of April of 2017. So the first thing that I was reading this month was Steven Erikson's Gardens of the Moon, which is the first in an epic fantasy series. I have not actually finished this because I was finding it really tedious, so I have put it aside and I'm going to try to get back to it later. I had some of the follow-ups to this on my list for Tome Topple. The books in this series are all massive beasts. But honestly, I'm not super engaged with it, so I'm still planning to finish this, and I'm hoping it'll get better as it goes along. And get better is tough, because I don't think it's poorly written. The style is fine, I just genuinely don't care about the things that are happening in it. So I may just be not in the mood for this, so I'm putting it aside for now, and we'll see how it goes. So the first thing that I read after that, I thought I need to go for a completely different flavor of book. So I read Rule Number 2, Lessons I Learned in a Combat Hospital by Heidi Kraft, who is a former US Navy psychologist. This is a memoir of her time in a combat hospital in Iraq, and she makes references a few times to the TV series MASH, and the book is almost written like an episodic TV program. You get primarily standalone chapters about different patients that she had, with a few that carry over. It's very moving. She very deftly avoids making any political commentary in this. It's very much about the people. There are a few points where I almost felt like something was missing because she didn't touch on the bigger picture, but ultimately I think that would have limited her audience, because I know there are a lot of people who approach military memoirs expecting things that are really at polar opposites on a spectrum, where people are either extremely nationalistic and they want that flavor, or they're extreme pacifists and they want exclusively that. So I think by leaving all of that out, even in a few places where I think it would have been stronger to include it, she definitely wrote a book that more people could read. And yeah, I thought she did an interesting job of both talking about her patients and talking about how the experience worked for her, because she was also in an interesting situation where she had toddler twins at the time. So in addition to the issues surrounding her job, that you do get that also the flavor of what deployment means to someone with children of that age. So that was interesting as well. As I said, I think it could have been deeper if she had touched on the broader socio-political issues, but I think that was clearly a choice she was making not to, and fair enough. Next up, I read Rue by King Thúy, which won the Governor General's Award a couple of years ago. It is a story about a woman who lives in Montreal, and it is basically a very poetic reflection on her life, starting as a child in Vietnam, very briefly in a displaced persons camp in Malaysia, and then finally moving to Quebec. So it manages to touch on both the refugee experience, the immigrant experience, the post-war experience, and then as an adult, she has twin sons, one of whom has autism, and again, whenever I talk about disability, I say, which language am I using? I am using that style of language because that is what the author uses. I'm fully aware that a lot of people would prefer identity language, but again, that's what's used in the books. The title is sort of an interesting play on words, because in Vietnamese it means a lullaby, and in French it means a creek or a stream, and and it's because it's so poetic, it is almost like a lullaby, and also like the kind of rolling river of life. It's not written in verse, but it feels like it could be. So, and this is a super short book. It's less than 150 pages. So you can definitely read that in one sitting. I didn't think it was as powerful as I was expecting, given some of the heavy topics that it deals with, but yeah, it was I hesitate to say pleasant read because it dealt with serious topics, but it was pleasant. So then over the weekend I went up to Toronto, because really the only reading that I did were ebooks that I read on the flight. And so one book that I finally finished is A Brief History of 7 Killings, which I started a year and a half ago. If we're friends on Goodreads, this is the book that's been on my currently reading list forever, because I found the first third of it to just be extremely slow going. I just couldn't get into it. I thought on paper, it's dealing with really interesting situations, and the writing is really solid, but I just couldn't get into it. And I've gone back to it a couple of times in between, and it's just never been quite the right time. But I finally finished this, and it helped that one of my flights was delayed, so I wanted to get through it. And it really picked up for me in the final third of the book. So I finally felt engaged with the content as opposed to reading it and kind of admiring it, which is what I'd been doing before. So I'm glad I finally finished this. It's one of those books, it's well done, and I think a lot of people, I mean, it won the Booker Prize a couple of years ago, so clearly a lot of other people liked it better than I did. Yeah, I admired it more than I really liked it, but I did really enjoy the final third of the book. As I said, my flight was delayed, so I started on another ebook, and that was Nexus Uprising, which is a Mass Effect Andromeda franchise product. It's a prequel to the game. I have finished the game. Not the best, but not as bad as some of the worst reviews have suggested. I haven't actually finished this book. I'm about 3/4 of the way through, so I will get to that one of these days. But yeah, it's entertaining enough. I like Tan a lot more in this than I liked him in the game. None of these are great art. They are very much franchise products, but it does a decent job. It is better than Deception, if you're familiar with the previous Mass Effect books. It's better than a lot of the comics have been. Yeah, it's alright. I just realized that actually the first thing that I read this month was Jhumpa Lahiri's The Clothing of Books, which is really just a couple of essays bound up. It is about book covers and typefaces and things like that. It doesn't do anything particularly deep. This is, as I said, really short and basically just a couple of essays. I thought it was interesting because I didn't know a lot about cover selection and how the artist and the author often don't know each other at all. So I thought that was really interesting, but yeah, not something particularly deep. Anyway, the final thing that I read this month was the volume 4 of The Samurai Executioner, which is by the same authors who did Lone Wolf and Cub. It is a series of stories about people who have been executed. Sometimes the executioner is talking to them. What's your last? Do you have any last words, or do you have any last requests? Things like that. Sometimes it's flashbacks about their crimes. And there are a few stories that are about a couple who are both essentially police officers. This is a lovely series. The art is fantastic. There are a few stories in here where there's no dialogue or very minimal dialogue. So the art does all the talking, and it's just a gorgeous book. It does a really nice job of presenting you with the setting and the historical period, and the characters are great. It's a very well done book. This is the final volume in the series. There are 3 other ones. It is long, but it's a quick read. I thoroughly recommend this. It's really nicely done. The one complaint that I would have is that some of the translation / localization work is a bit fishy. There are some bits where to transmit, I guess, class information, they give some of the characters what is basically a kind of American hillbilly type accent. I don't know how to describe that better. But, and that's a little weird because it seems so regionally specific that to see it transported to Shogunate Japan seems strange. But you can see why they're doing it and what information they're trying to present you with for that. So, yeah, that's the only problem that I have with this book. I was originally going to say I didn't read that much because I was traveling and because I've been playing both Mass Effect and Andromeda and Persona 5, which has come out now too. But actually that was a decent stack of books, so clearly I have been reading more than I originally thought I had. That's it for now. Ciao.